Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Tango Banter. I am Yelizaveta, and I am doing something different today, a little bit of development here on my set. If you're watching this episode on my YouTube channel, you'll notice I have a little bit of a different background. And if you're listening to this episode, maybe the sound quality is a little bit different because I'm trying out different things to upgrade my setup here and improve the visual and the auditory experience. So let me know what you think about the changes, if they make a difference for you. I'd love to know that. Now, before we launch into our topic today, there's a few things I wanted to put out there. I have recently had a chance to meet some more of my listeners, and one in particular surprised me at a milonga that I was attending, and she said something that I realized I hear a lot from many of my listeners, which is that listening to this podcast feels very calming, that it's something that is very supportive, and you like listening to me on your way somewhere, or in the evenings when you have some time, when you're taking some personal time, and that this podcast is a tool for you to feel better. And it just really warms my heart to hear that, because when I think about what's made the most difference for me in my life, both as a tango dancer and as a woman, what comes to mind are people, other people, rare people that come into my life to reassure me of certain things, like that I'm not crazy, that what I'm experiencing is legit and it's okay to feel the way I do, that I am good enough, that I have what it takes, that I don't need to be different, that I don't need to be fixed, that there's nothing wrong with me. And there's been a number of people who have come into my life in pivotal moments and said the right thing at the right time that gave me just enough of peace of mind to proceed, to continue to do what I'm doing. And it's so valuable to have that. And that's what I imagine is somewhat my mission, to pass that on, because we're all equipped, we're all talented, we're all very capable, and all we need is someone there to reassure us of our own power, reassure us of our own intuitive wisdom. And so I'm happy to serve that role in your life to whatever degree that is necessary for you. And this podcast has become a great avenue for that. But there's also other ways that I am testing to see what other avenues of support I can offer and how my message can be clearer and more available. So there's a few things that I do that you may or may not know about that I was going to mention, so that you know that's there if you would like to take advantage of it. First of all, I have a newsletter that I send out every week. And so if you're not on my list and you would like to be, shoot me a message with your email address and I'm happy to add you. In that newsletter, I typically send out announcements of new episodes and I share a little bit of inspiration or put out questions for crowdsourcing information for future podcasts. So there's different ways I use my newsletter for that. And then I also have my private Facebook group where on a weekly basis I ask questions and start conversations around different issues. And then I do a little live chat, a little live Q&A on Fridays from 12 to 1 p.m. Pacific time. So those are things that are happening on a regular basis in addition to my social media, my Instagram, my Facebook. So you probably already know about that. But also, recently I've been connecting more and more with different people, both in person and online. And there are a couple of events coming up that you might be interested in. One is that on the 28th of this month, which is coming up in a few days, Friday the 28th, I'll be teaching a pre-Milonga class at Milonga Corazon here in Los Angeles. So if you are local and you plan to be in the area and you're planning to go to the Milonga, I would love to see you in the class. It's the first time I'm teaching a pre-Milonga class in Los Angeles, which is sort of strange to say that, but I can't remember teaching another class. And those of you who know me know that my absolutely favorite thing to work on is musicality. So our theme for that evening will be all about musicality and using the concept of marcato to spice up your dance. So I hope you take advantage of that if you're in the area. But if not, you can catch me at another event. This one will be online, and that's going to be on November 10th. I am collaborating with a few folks on a special discussion on the topic of confronting fear to get the dances you want. So it's going to be somewhat of a lecture/interview discussion roundtable type of event on Zoom. And it's free. It's open to everyone. And I'm going to be aiming to be a little bit more honest, even more open about sharing some experiences that I haven't really opened up about. And there's some reasons why I've waited this long, because sometimes it just takes a while to even know how to talk about certain things. So if the theme of fear and anxiety and self-esteem and body image and relationships, if any of those themes resonate with you, I invite you to join this live event. And registration for that is on my website. And in fact, all of the info for all of the upcoming events is on my website. So you can go to imsotango.com to learn more and register. Finally, because we are finishing up the month of talking about the concept of practice, I thought I would include a little update about my own experience with practice recently. I, as you know, was in the process of starting to be a musician in an orchestra, and I was having a really tough time, and it really put me up against a lot of different fears and anxieties that have been hanging around in my mind for years. And since then, I'm happy to report that I've had some amazing experiences that helped me overcome that, and now I feel a lot more at ease, and it's fun. It's starting to be fun to be on this journey, and I knew I was going to get here. That was not in question. I just wondered what was it going to take and how long? And it's interesting to reflect back and observe that when I was feeling all that anxiety, that I felt so much pressure, and I felt so much anticipation of failure and conviction that I'm not good enough, and it was so real. And now that I've been, we rehearsed a few times, and I've practiced a couple of times with the other pianist from the orchestra. We meet up and we practice, and it's like there's just this such an overwhelming feeling of relief. Like the amount of relief that I feel now is equal in proportion to the amount of fear and anxiety that I felt, which points to me to a particular truth that I find to be very present in my life. And I'm curious if you've observed this for yourself, and that is that if there's something out there that you really want to do and you really, really are scared of it, like you're super scared of doing it, a lot of times it's the thing that you're supposed to be doing. And so for me, as much anxiety as I felt about not having what it takes and having all this self-judgment, now that I'm on the other side of it, I'm aware of this feeling of rightness about doing it, and thinking, gosh, how could I believe that this was not meant for me? Like, I am made for this. It's not a choice. It's not like I can will myself to want to be a musician, to play music. It's so a part of me that when I play, as difficult as it is, as frustrating as it is, when I play, I can tell I am meant to be playing. And that's such a cool feeling. And I'm sure for many of us, we have things like that in our lives that we look at and we think that we can't do it, we're not enough in some way. And we take that emotion to mean that it's legitimately true, that is the truth. And if it wasn't true, we wouldn't feel that way. And I know for people who are either trying to get into tango or have gotten into tango and having a hard time, and you think, like, there's no way I can do this, I'm just crap at this, all these emotions, like, the truth is, the stronger your feeling about it is, the more reward you will have on the other side of it. So it's many times very worthwhile to go ahead and jump in without knowing how you're going to do it, and being ready to fail fully, which is what I had to do in order to proceed with this, because I was really panicking before the first rehearsal. And I had this thought, like, I'm going to mess up. I'm going to totally fail. And there was this voice in my head. It was like, yeah, okay, fail. Just let's go and let's fail epically. Let's just find out what it means to fail in this context. And I had to have that willingness to go for it. So I don't know if this resonates with you or you've had experiences like this, I hope that this is an encouragement for your own journey in whatever it is that you're exploring. So I know I talked a lot. There was just a few things I wanted to share before talking about our theme today, which is 13 ways that you can ruin your practice. And 13 is what I came up with as I pondered this topic. It's just like bam, 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 one after another. It just came to me. And, at first when I decided to make this list, I had a little bit of a block, and I was like, let's see, what can I think of? And I thought, maybe I won't come up with enough, or there won't be enough. But then all I had to do was just sort of tap into my memory of my own experience of practice and think about all the things that I have done wrong. I definitely am guilty of all of these things. And I might not come across that way now, and I know a lot better. And I know many people who still do these things, and they don't maybe recognize that there's anything wrong with doing it that way. But I definitely went through the ringer internally from having these obstacles in my own mind when it comes to practice. And it's ruined a lot of my connections with different people over the years and created a lot of tension. And I've just learned a lot from that. So I'm sharing this with you. And again, of course, I don't want to say that this is an exclusive list. I'm sure there's more, and maybe you disagree with some of these points, which you're always welcome to write me and contest it and give me your own perspective. I love hearing from all of you. Keep that coming, so you can reach out to me. The first way you can mess up your practice is by using it as an opportunity to teach the other person. And teaching can be seen as helping. A lot of times, the person who takes on the role of the teaching thinks that they're actually helping. And that's what I thought for a long time. It's like, this person doesn't know, and I know, and it's my duty to show them. But practice time is not teaching time. And when we step into a role of teaching the other person without their permission or invitation or request, we just do it because we think we know better, we then are saying that somehow we're not equal. This is not practice anymore, right? One of us becomes the authority and the other person becomes the student. And that's a very different dynamic that the other person might not be ready for or interested in. And I've experienced this both as a follower who is receiving that kind of treatment with male leaders who volunteer feedback uncontrollably and want me to know everything that's wrong with my movement. And I also experienced it as a person who is leading, right? As a leader or as a person who's initiating the practice, that I can sort of take over because I'm such a natural born teacher. Teaching is just kind of like what I do. I joke that anything I get passionate about, I end up teaching it. And it's true. I mean, teaching for me is like, it's this art form, right? It's an art form. And so I really am excited about it. But I had to be really careful about choosing the context in which I go into that role, because it changes the whole dynamic of the practice. And it's not really practice anymore for me or for the other person. It's more of a, some sort of other exchange and dynamic that has a different energy to it. Now, the next two are sort of related, and that is talking too much or not talking enough. So another solid way that you can ruin your practice and you can diminish its power is by either talking too much or talking too little. The talking too much relates to the first point of going into that teaching mode. That's usually when talking too much happens. But just as equally, not talking enough can be just as bad, just as dysfunctional. And this especially happens when followers or women resist the urge to say something negative. And in fact, I've noticed this to be the case, that women in general will opt out of saying anything and instead blame it on themselves and just say, well, it must be something I'm doing. And they won't say anything. Or they'll look to the other person to tell them how to correct it automatically. instead of bringing it up and saying like, well, actually this is what I'm experiencing. This is what I feel. So I would say those are some of the top things that you can fall into, little traps that will take away the power of your practice with another person. The next thing I wrote down is trying to fix the other person. Again, you kind of can see it sort of relates to that very first point. So it's like I'm expanding on it. But this mindset, this urge to fix the other person is very, very much of the ego, right? It's very much of the ego, because if we're trying to fix the other person, it's because we perceive that there is the way things are supposed to be, and that we are doing it right and the other person is doing it wrong, and it needs to be fixed. A lot of times for me, that's where I was coming from. If I start feeling this sensation of like, oh, this needs to be fixed and that needs to be fixed, it's maybe you even like don't say anything. I've noticed this to be pretty powerful, that even if I don't say it, but I think it, and I'm sort of focusing on that in my mind, the other person will feel it. And it's so trippy. I really feel like we're connected in this psychic way when we're dancing tango. So if I'm really critical of the other person, but I don't say anything, a lot of times the other person will start being critical of themselves, and they'll start saying, you know, oh, I'm doing this wrong and I'm really bad about this. And you know, it's pretty trippy how that works. I don't know if I'm causing it. Of course, there's no way to test that, but it's just nice to remember that even a mindset, without saying it, even a mindset can impact how you're experiencing your practice time and how the other person feels. The other way that you can ruin your practice is by having unreasonable expectations. So that relates back to our discussion about really knowing what you want and being clear about that and finding a practice partner based on that. So from the very start, being very clear about where you are, what you're after, and where your partner is coming from. So if I decide to practice with someone who is a beginner, and I have an ambition to perform, to do a stage performance, and that's what I need a partner for, and then I have this expectation that this person is going to get to the level of the performance, there's definitely an imbalance there. So, you know, you have to kind of reconsider. But also, even on a subtle level, expecting perfection, precision, and some sort of like achievement of more and more and more and more, and building more and more towards something that's an ideal in your mind. I hope you can kind of sense that energy in yourself. Like it's like not very satisfying, and you end up wanting more and more, and you end up being dissatisfied with what you have. So I was in, you know, a situation where I worked with somebody like that, where they definitely had very unreasonable expectations of themselves and of me, and they were reaching for some really high goal, this very ambitious sort of, so ambitious that it's kind of too theoretical even, and it made me miserable, and it did not work well for both of us. And so the next thing I actually wrote down is very similar, and that is another way you can ruin your practice is to strive for perfection, either from yourself or from your partner. To expect that you're going to learn something and you're going to execute it right away, or you're going to be able to do it a number of times in a row perfectly, or you're going to put in 3 hours of practice, and those hours are going to contain all of these drills, and there's going to be this like, really rigid structure to it. And it's like this sense of perfection. It can become so obsessive. Once again, it's unreasonable. And there is no such thing. There's no such thing as perfection. And practice actually, practice does not make perfection, right? Practice makes more practice. Like, it doesn't even, the progress part of it is maybe not even that important. It's just the practice. You have to just enjoy the practice. And if you have a sense of perfection that you're reaching for, it becomes this chase of micromanaging every part of your body and every part of your movement. Everything becomes this chase after a certain ideal. And man, there's nothing more potent in taking the wind out of your sails when you have to hold some sort of ideal in your mind and reach for it. Now, the next thing that you could do to ruin your practice is blame the other person or blame yourself. So basically, you see that something is wrong, and the moment you see it wrong, you say to yourself, something's not okay with it, and so now we have to figure out whose fault it is. And it is common that typically within practice setting, a lot of times it will be the leaders blaming the followers for not doing something correctly. But then that's not all the time. Sometimes it's the other way around. And then you have cases when people are blaming themselves. They're like, oh no, it's all my fault. That's me. I don't have it. I don't have enough technique. And I tell you, it is so fruitless to spend your time assessing whose fault it is for what happens. It definitely stops you in your tracks. And when we're talking about like lack of progress, that's going to cause a huge lack of progress, because you get too invested in being right about who it is to blame. You're like, no, it's me. Or no, it's you. It's yours. You're to blame. So blaming the other person or yourself for things. And then the next one I put down, the number 9, is take things personally. And that's a big one. I definitely think it's something that you have to learn not to do. It's a sign of maturity when we can just not take things personally. So I definitely have been in a place where I've taken things very personally, and I have a very hard time taking feedback in. And there's a lot of blind spots for me. I'm really good at giving feedback. And I guess I feel like I take the feedback that I need at the time that I need it, and then other times I'm very resistant. But still, I do struggle from taking things personally. And maybe in my other areas of my life, it's more prominent. In terms of practice, I've learned to separate myself from the dance and just treat it as, look, this is this thing that I'm working on that's outside of me. It's not defining who I am. It has nothing to do with my worth as a person. This is a project. This is a work of art that's out there that I'm working on. And I know it's a very simplistic way of breaking it down, and ultimately it's hard to actually take that point of view on when you're in the middle of feeling that, when you're like taking things personally. But nonetheless, the more we can detach ourselves and let things just roll off and be sort of like a duck within the water, like you don't let those things stick to you. I think it's definitely worthwhile to focus on that. Now, the other thing, the number 10, is all about having really high stakes. And again, it goes back to seeking perfection, high expectations, but the high stakes feeling is sort of particular because there are times when practicing a certain way and achieving certain things in the practice define someone's identity to such an extent that it just feels like unless you meet those goals, that you're a failure. Unless you do it this way, this many times, for this long, it doesn't count. And that's a huge one for me. And I'm recovering from that because I tend to get locked in to this feeling like, well, I can do this, but if I do a little bit more, that's even better. And then it becomes more and more and more. And then suddenly it's like, if I don't do all of this, it doesn't count. If I don't sit down to practice for 3 hours, that doesn't really count as practice. If I don't practice 3 times a day, I shouldn't even bother practicing because that will mean that I'm not a real dancer or something. So that feeling of high stakes, that there's a lot wrapped up in being able to accomplish this intense goal of some kind, that really messes with you, and it prevents you from really enjoying the practice, and then it sours the connection with the partner, because then you can very easily get into a place where you're expecting the same of your partner. You know, I think this is a fascinating one to think about in relationships too, because in my relationship with my partner, I've noticed there's this feeling of like, well, since I'm doing something every day and I'm being all, like this, then he should be doing that too. And then if he's not doing it, it means that something's wrong. And it's like a subtle little shift there to realize that, you're choosing the stakes. They're not real. They're not, nobody's imposing those on you. You can choose the stakes, and you can choose to feel good whenever you want to feel good about it. You can feel good about 15 minutes of practice. You can feel good about not practicing. It doesn't, the stakes are just what you choose them to be. So it took some time for me to realize that I'm the one in charge of the stakes. All right, we're down to the last 3. And the next one, number 11, I said, give feedback immediately after trying something for the first time. So this is a little bit of a nitty-gritty point, but I notice this happens a lot. It happens a lot even in situations where you're having a private with someone. So it's not just in practice, but also in a session. It can happen in a group setting, group class, where you're learning something new and you do it once, and the teacher or the partner immediately starts giving you feedback on how to correct it. There is just nothing more frustrating. I tell you, the amount of tension I've had, because when that happens a lot, I notice this for myself, and I'm curious if you've experienced that. So I would practice with my partner, and he would give me all of this, all this instruction about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And then we do it once. And as we're doing it, all I can think about is I just want to do it well enough so that he just lets it pass, right? Like, that's all I'm thinking about, is just doing it the way he wants, so that I can fly under the radar and evade his critical eye. But it's like immediately he starts giving me feedback about how no, I need to do this differently and that differently. And it becomes so nitpicky. And you're kind of lost at that point. And, I really changed that about myself too, because as a teacher, it's very, especially as like a mover and a body worker and really being tapped into people's bodies, I feel a lot whenever I take the embrace with someone. I mean, I'm so passionate about movement. And so the moment I take the embrace, I feel all these things in the body. It's like I have a probe and I can feel exactly where the tension lies and what could be different and the alignment and why they're losing balance. And it's just like a reel running in the back of my mind. But I have to stop myself from giving the feedback, because whatever I'm perceiving is a tiny slice on a continuum of time. And tango takes place over time. It doesn't happen in one slice. Just because right now I'm feeling a certain thing doesn't mean I'm going to feel it the next minute or in 2 minutes. So whenever I'm dancing with my students in terms of my privates, I always spend a lot of time just dancing without talking, without giving any feedback, and getting the person to get on the other side of this questioning mindset of, is this right? Am I doing it right? And that doubt, that like those jitters, right, that you feel first when you first take the embrace with the teacher and you're trying to do it the right way, and there's a lot of nervousness. And I, on purpose, when the student first comes in, I just first dance with them a couple of songs, no feedback, and then start making some plans on like what to focus on, because I realized that whatever I get right away it doesn't count. Like that first song of the session doesn't count. We're just warming up. There's no reason. The first time you do a movement that you just learned, it doesn't really count. You have to do like a ton more before feedback is relevant. And you know what I've learned? This might be useful for those of you who want to take my words to heart. And you might ask, well, but what if something is like you really need to share with them, and what if you want to help them and there's a way that you can help? I kind of made a rule for myself, especially when I'm working with people in practice sessions, but also in my class, is wait for the question. Wait for the question to arise. Don't just throw information out as if you're casting a huge net over a huge area and you're just trying to cover all the bases. You want to give them everything. That's how I used to feel when I would teach a private. I would just here's 30 things that I'm feeling that you need to do. Here it is. That's your recipe. Go fix it. It doesn't work that way. People are not ready. A lot of times for me, the point of practice is to plug in and realize what is the appropriate question for this moment right now. And I notice that if I wait for my partner or my student to either make an observation about themselves and ask for feedback on that observation, or ask me a particular question about something, that's my cue to step in and give what I know. And it will be received, and most likely it will be retained much more easily, because in that moment you're giving your partner exactly what they need. So in terms of practice, it's really useful to, instead of just give feedback freely as much as possible, or not give feedback ever, it's really nice to just say, okay, what is relevant right now? And just wait to see what arises. And either partner can make an observation, can ask questions, can comment, right? And when you're commenting on something, when you are in that dialogue with your partner, it's really useful to, instead of saying, I think this is wrong, or, you're doing this, I feel that you're doing this, and I'm doing this in response. Like the whole I and you, they're sort of a little bit of a difficult words. They're very volatile. So I tend to focus instead on language such as, this is what I'm experiencing right now. This is how this feels to me, right? And it can be like, this is what I'm experiencing. I wonder if it's this. I don't know. It might be this. And you invite the other person to contribute the same. And then you, as a team, come up with something to test and try. And you're both in it. You're both looking for that place of connection and resonance with each other to try something the way a team of scientists in a lab would come up with a hypothesis, and then they're going to work out whether the hypothesis is right or not. Like if the hypothesis is wrong, it would be weird if they took it personally and be like, well, it's your fault, It's silly when you think of it in that context. But in tango, it's tricky not to take things personally and not to just fall into these traps of trying to fix the other person or trying to blame them. So it's good to instead think that this thing called tango is an opportunity for you and your partner to tap into some sort of creative space and both ask questions and both help each other, both of you equally contributing to each other's growth. The last two might seem a little bit redundant, but I'll go ahead and say them. Focusing on doing things right. Again, this is something that we as tango dancers can fall into the trap, because there are some dancers and some teachers who will proclaim that there is a right way of doing tango, that it's supposed to be like this. I hear this a lot from people who come to me and they say, well, so-and-so said that your knees need to be straight. And they said this to me 10 years ago, and that's how I've been dancing. And your knees need to be locked. But then they're like, so I have this foot pain. Why do my feet hurt? And I'm like, well, it's because your knees shouldn't be straight. So there are multiple perspectives. There's always multiple perspectives. And there's no such thing as finding the right one. There's not right one. What you're doing is you're synthesizing information, right? So when you take an instruction from someone, you put it on, you try it on, you test it, you see the results, you see what happens. And then if somebody else comes along and gives you the complete opposite instruction, that's okay. That's okay, because that's what exists in the world of tango, and that's life. And I think in life we have a really hard time with that, because we really want to feel safe. If we figure out what is right, we can feel safe because this is the right thing. But really, the safety that we might be signing up for is nothing in comparison to the freedom that we get when we realize that there is no right way. It's only the way that you resonate with. So if this way works for you right now, great. And if that way happens to change because something needs to change in response to your life events, then you let it change, and there's nothing wrong with it. So an example of that will be for a lot of women that I meet, they come to me and they say, I'm having to sell my high heel shoe collection because I'm finding that it's too painful to dance in heels. And so for some of them, there's a tone of regret, or this feeling of man, I couldn't do it. I wasn't good enough to last, or there's a sense of loss. because the right way, or the more right way, is to dance in heels rather than in flats. But it's like, no. I mean, if you were, if you had a race car, a two-door race car as a young single person, and then you decide to upgrade to a bigger car because you have a family and you now are going to have a bigger car to get around, why is that bad? Like, that's great. That's good that you're adapting to the needs of your life, and you can enjoy life in an even fuller way because now you have this new experience of having a family and having a big car and being able to go on road trips and whatever. So there's other examples of that in life, of course. So why would that be any different for tango? Tango will evolve. It will change. Your preferences will change. So there is no right way. There's just a way that works for you right now. And lastly, I'm going to finish with a really good one, and that is judging your mistakes and trying to correct them. So this one is a sneaky one because it has to do with this feeling that we're always trying to correct ourselves. We're always trying to get better at something. And I think that is somewhat more prominent for women than men. I don't know if I'm right on this. Of course, I don't have a huge sample, but in my life, I've noticed that it's pretty common for women to constantly try to improve themselves, and I definitely fall into that category. But then it creates this mindset that when there's mistakes, there's something wrong. So when you go into practice and, like a dear friend of mine who still says, my turns are just terrible. I have a really hard time with my turns. I've always had problems with it. And I'm like, what is the problem? I don't get it. But for her, it's like she sees that there's some mistakes and she's always trying to fix them. And this especially happens when you're learning something new. You're immediately aware of the mistakes that you're making, and there's this judgment about doing it incorrectly, or that you're supposed to get it right. That if you don't get it right now, it means that something is wrong with you, that somehow you're defective. I had a real change of heart on this issue recently, thanks to a brilliant podcast that I can't stop talking about by Andrew Huberman, the Huberman Lab podcast. Brilliant guy from Stanford University. He was a scientist, and he covers a lot of scientific ground and synthesizes scientific research in such a way that it gives normal, regular people that are not scientists a way to understand the body, understand our experiences in the world. And he talked a lot about, in one of his episodes, he talked about learning and how to accelerate learning. And he pointed out that moment when we feel very frustrated with something and we're making a mistake over and over again, whether we're learning an instrument or we're trying a new movement, the frustration that we're feeling is actually a symptom of neural plasticity taking place, that the brain is actually in a state of learning when we are feeling that frustration. And that it is in those times what's really important is just to keep doing it regardless of whether it's wrong or right. You're attempting to do it right, but just because you're doing it wrong doesn't mean anything. You actually just need to keep doing it, and that's part of your brain learning. So I will actually I'll put a link to that episode in the show notes, because I've really benefited a lot from listening to it. And I think if you're curious about it, I think you would love some of the stuff that he suggests. And I've already seen a lot of improvement in my learning and in my experience of practice, just from shifting a little bit of my perspective on this idea of mistakes and the idea of trying to correct them all the time. So, all right, so those are my 13 things you can do to ruin your practice. I am curious if you have other things to add to this list, and if you want to share more of your experiences, I would love to hear from you. Feel free to reach out to me on my social media at I'm So Tango, or email me at connect@imsotango.com. It's been a pleasure. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and I will see you next week for the next episode of the Tango Banter. Ciao.